Hi there, and welcome to the Shure Creators channel, where in this series we're talking about podcasting. I'm Naomi Meller, the founder of the Skylark Collective and the International Women's Podcast Awards, and we're here today aboard the Boat Pod, where we're going to be taking you through the basics of starting a podcast. In our first episode, we talked about planning and developing an idea for your podcast. Today, we're going to be touching on the structure of your show, how to hook your listeners in and keep them with you, and how to prepare guests for interview. So when we're talking about structure, some of the world's biggest shows are interview-based. Yes, we're looking at you, Joe Rogan. And this is a simple but effective concept. It's you plus one or more guests talking about whatever the heck you like. Just sit down, put on your mics, and off you go. But there are other options too. Many of us love reading, but struggle to find the time to sit down with a book these days, which probably explains why fiction podcasts like Hello from the Magic Tavern, Limetown, Welcome to Night Vale have all exploded in popularity to give audiobooks a run for their money. If you've got an idea and you want to write a fiction podcast, go for your life. Writing a fiction podcast is arguably the hardest genre for a newbie podcaster, unless you're already a writer, of course. But if you've got an idea, then write it down and run with it. No need for a literary agent or a publishing deal when you're a podcaster. Then there's narrative non-fiction. This might be a term that you haven't heard before, but it basically covers documentary, true crime, and any other true-ish story that's told through voiceovers, interviews, and commentary. A lot of podcasts fall into this category. To make them really good takes a lot of work, research, and hard graft, but they can be masterpieces of audio. One of the original and biggest podcasts ever was Serial, and that is a narrative non-fiction podcast, but there have been many, many others since. And finally, there's solo scripted podcasts. That's just you and your microphone talking about something that you're passionate about, expert about, or just want to talk about. Personal essays work well here, or educational topics, so yoga, meditation, or the theories of the universe, whatever floats your boat. When you're thinking about structure and storytelling, always keep in mind what you want to achieve and what you want people to take away from listening to your podcast. How do you want to make them feel? Less alone? Inspired? On a cliff edge waiting for your next episode? If you're writing a podcast series where you want to keep people hooked all the way to the end, you need to consider where your crescendos are. What are you building towards? Think of it like a Netflix series. Binge listening is a thing, just like binge watching. So build it up. If you want people to fly through your season all the way to the end, you need to hook them in and keep them hooked. One of the best pieces of advice I've been given is that the first 30 seconds of your podcast is the most important bit of your show. There are a lot of podcasts out there, literally millions for people to choose from. You need to show them why your show is the one they should be listening to. Smile a lot because it will translate into that warmth in your voice. It'll give your show a nice opening. Listen back to the start of your show and then listen to it again. Would you want to listen to it? Statistics, and we all love a stat, say that if people listen to the first 3 minutes of your show, they're quite likely to listen to it all the way through to the end. So intrigue them. Make it good. Make that first 30 seconds and then the first 3 minutes the very best you can. It will really help you. Sometimes a really useful tool for hooking people in is to have a trailer. Your trailer is your elevator pitch. It should last 1 to 2 minutes and it should really sum up what your podcast is about and why people want to listen. Think of it as your shop window. People are walking past. They see your trailer, they hear it. They should want to know more about your show after they've heard it. You can pin it to the top of your feed and it should always be there. You can have one for your whole show or one per season if you're working in seasons. But just think about it as a concise summary of your podcast that is really, really brilliant. Make it good and make it snappy. Ideally, your podcast, whatever the genre, should have a narrative arc of some kind. What story do you want to tell? If you're interviewing a guest, what story do you want them to tell? Most successful podcasts have a consistent structure that stays true over a period of time, and that their fans learn to expect and to love. That consistency can really reap dividends and is definitely worth keeping over a period if it's working for you. If you're interviewing guests, research and preparation is the key thing in drawing out that story from them. If you've got an interview podcast, preparing your guests is really important, and it's a common point of discussion for new podcasters. Should you send questions in advance? Should you have a call with your guests if you haven't met them before? These are really personal choices. Some people do, some people don't. Personally, I like my conversations to be quite loose and flowing, so I don't send questions in advance because I don't want people to sound too rehearsed. But my shows are edited, and I'm also comfortable with quickly establishing a rapport with people. You might find, particularly in the early days, that having a pre-call or sending the questions helps you all to feel a little bit more confident. But what I do is send a briefing email to my guests. This gives them instructions about recording and an overview of what the interview will be about and what themes and topics they might expect us to touch on. I also give them the opportunity to tell me if there's anything, either personal or professional, that they don't want to discuss so that we can avoid those topics during the actual interview. Remember that the gold comes when your guest is happy and comfortable, and you need to allow enough time for this in your recording. I often write off the first 10 minutes or so as chat time. This is when I'm warming up myself and the guest. We're getting to know each other, and I'm making people feel at ease. The more you can put your guests at ease, the more they will give you. If your guest needs and wants a lot of prep because they've never been on a podcast before, then give it to them. If they're a seasoned pro and they're happy to go with the flow, then maybe keep it more relaxed and just have a loose, more flowing conversation. People are different. Their needs are different. And if you've got the empathy and intuition to tell the difference between those two, then you'll be drawing out some brilliant podcast interviews in no time. As a final hint, if you're using a script, get used to having a piece of paper in your hand and think about why you need it. If you've got something and you're like, people will hear the indecision in your voice and it will come across in your podcast. Unless you're narrating voiceover, you might use questions or a script far less than you think. It's worth practicing, and it's worth working out what works for you, because certainly I, for one, often write stuff down and then never, ever look at it. Today, we've whizzed through structure and storytelling, how to hook your listeners in with a compelling opening or a trailer, and how to prepare your guests for interview. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the Shure Creators channel and click the bell below to be notified when the next episode comes out. In episode 3, we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of recording a podcast, so do join us then.